The aged neon light on the ceiling of the Oakhaven County Jail hallway flickered, casting distorted, eerie shadows onto the cold concrete walls. A heavy metallic clang echoed as the door to cell block 7 creaked open. The guard, a large man with a face as impassive as stone and eyes devoid of life, stepped inside. His breath reeked of cheap coffee and cigarettes. "Time, Cole. Time's up." His voice was flat, almost robotic, devoid of emotion, like he was reading a weather report. Ethan Cole, the man sitting on the rickety bunk bed, slowly raised his head. The faint light from the hallway illuminated his face, etching the weary lines deeper. Heavy steel handcuffs cinched around his thin wrists, leaving angry red marks. 5 long years within these 4 walls, 5 years waiting under the shadow of a death sentence hanging like an executioner's blade, had taken its toll on his body. The deep lines etched around his eyes and on his forehead weren't just from age. They were a map of suffering, despair, and an almost fanatical persistence. But his eyes, hidden beneath thick brows, held none of the fear typical of those facing imminent death. Instead, they contained a smoldering fire of unshakable determination, a silent defiance against his grim fate. He had spent 5 years screaming his innocence into a hopeless void, and now, though time had run out, the truth was the only weapon he had left. "I have one last request." Ethan's voice was hoarse from disuse, but clear enough in the stifling silence of the cell. "I want to see my dog, Ranger." The guard paused for a beat, his impassive expression flickering with surprise. He'd witnessed all sorts of last requests, lavish meals of lobster and steak, tearful phone calls to loved ones, last-minute confessions to priests. But a dog? Rules were rules, rigid and unbending. Animals weren't allowed in maximum security. He glanced at Ethan, trying to gauge if this was some cruel joke or a sign of a final mental break. "A dog." Warden Miller, who had just walked up behind the guard, spoke. He was a middle-aged man with close-cropped, salt and pepper hair and the permanent weariness common to long-term prison system employees. He looked surprised too, but his eyes held more curiosity than suspicion. "You know that's against regulations, Cole?" "I know, Warden," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "But he's all I have left. He's my only family." Warden Miller hesitated. He looked into Ethan's eyes, saw the sincerity and the burning desire there. Something about this prisoner made him unable to completely dismiss the strange request. Maybe it was the unwavering insistence over the past 5 years, or perhaps a flicker of sympathy somewhere in his jaded heart. "Highly irregular," he muttered, stroking his chin. "Let me look into it. See what I can do." He turned and left, leaving the guard standing watch at the door. Ethan was alone again with his wandering thoughts in the cramped cell, where time seemed to stand still. He closed his eyes, trying to push away the images of the final walk, of the execution chamber. Instead, Ranger's image materialized sharply in his mind. The majestic, loyal German shepherd, with his glossy golden-brown coat and intelligent amber eyes. Ranger wasn't just a pet. He was his companion, his sole source of emotional support since that fateful night, the night his life was turned upside down and he was hauled away in handcuffs. He vividly remembered the day he rescued Ranger, then just a weak puppy trembling in the corner of an overcrowded animal shelter. He'd seen a fierce spark of life in those small eyes, a resilience that mirrored his own. And Ranger, somehow sensing his pain, had stayed by his side, licking away desperate tears and pulling him back from the darkest depths when the whole world had turned its back. He was living proof of loyalty and unconditional love, things the human world seemed to have forgotten. "Just one last time, Ranger," he whispered into the void, his voice choked. "I just want to see you, feel you one more time." Fragile hope flickered within him, a tiny spark in the endless night. 15 miles from Oakhaven Jail, past cornfields and quiet country roads, in a cozy little log cabin tucked beneath the shade of an old oak tree, a phone rang shrilly, shattering the late-night silence. Abby Foster jolted awake. She sat up abruptly in the old armchair in her living room, the book she'd been reading tumbling to the floor. The dim light from a table lamp cast shadows on her messy red hair and the green eyes weary from lack of sleep. As a young veterinarian, Abby's life revolved around midnight emergencies and long hours. She scrambled for the landline receiver. Foster Veterinary Clinic? Her voice was thick with sleep. Miss Foster? This is Warden Miller from Oak Haven Jail. The voice on the other end was formal and slightly urgent. I'm calling about Ethan Cole. At the mention of his name, Abby sat bolt upright, all traces of fatigue vanishing, replaced by sudden tension. Her heart began to pound in her chest. Ethan? Is something wrong? He has a last request, ma'am. And it involves the dog you're caring for. Ranger? Abby held her breath. He wants to see Ranger? Yes. He wants to see him before. Warden Miller cleared his throat, hesitating. Before the sentence is carried out. Early tomorrow morning. Abby froze. Early tomorrow morning. There wasn't much time left. She pressed her lips together, a wave of helplessness and anger washing over her. She had believed in Ethan's innocence from the start. She knew him before the tragedy, a gentle man, an animal lover, incapable of the heinous crime he was accused of. Over the past 5 years she'd received dozens of letters from Ethan, the handwriting shaky but firm, filled with his unwavering belief that the truth would eventually come out, that justice would prevail. She had kept that faith with him, caring for Ranger like a silent promise. But now it seemed everything was about to end in tragedy. I'll bring him, Abby said, forcing her voice to remain calm. Give me an hour to get ready. Thank you, Miss Foster. This means a lot to him. The warden hung up. Abby placed the receiver back in its cradle, her hand trembling. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Ranger. Come here, boy, she called out, her voice echoing in the quiet house. Normally, Ranger would come running at the sound of her voice, tail wagging furiously. But this time only silence answered. A sense of unease crept into Abby's heart. She stood up and walked quickly to the back door leading to the fenced yard. The front door was locked, but the glass door leading to the porch was suspiciously ajar, letting in the cold night air. And then her eyes fell on something on the floor near the door. A piece of a leather leash, severed cleanly, the cut sharp, not chewed or frayed. Real panic seized Abby. Her heart plummeted. Ranger wasn't just missing. He'd been taken. Someone had broken into her house and taken Ranger. But why? Who would want to harm a dog? Or was Ranger not the real target? With trembling hands she dialed a number on her cell phone. A number she hadn't called in a long time. A number tied to complicated memories and a past she tried to leave behind. It rang twice before someone picked up. Nash. Abby's voice cracked with fear. I need your help. It's urgent. It's about Ethan. And Ranger. Ranger's missing. Someone took him. There was a significant pause on the other end, just the sound of steady breathing. Then a deep, gravelly yet confident voice replied, without a hint of surprise, I'm on my way. Understood. Time slipped away like sand through her fingers. Every passing second felt like a hammer blow to Abby's chest. She frantically searched the house, hoping against hope that Ranger was just hiding somewhere. She checked every closet, under every bed, beneath the sofa, calling his name until her voice was raw. But Ranger seemed to have vanished into thin air. She ran out onto the back porch where the window had been forced open. Fresh mud stained the windowsill and floor. Faint footprints of a man's boots and Ranger's large paw prints led out into the yard and disappeared onto the damp grass. Abby stared into the darkness shrouding the garden and the fields beyond. The crisp, cool night air carried the chirping of insects and the faint scent of wild grass. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, but it wasn't Ranger's deep, resonant bark. Desperate, she turned back towards the house, intending to grab her car keys and drive around searching, even though she knew it was almost futile. But just as she reached the front door, blinding headlights swept across the property. A black Dodge Charger, old but meticulously maintained, screeched to a halt just outside her gate, its engine rumbling powerfully. The driver's door flew open and a tall, powerfully built man emerged. He wore a worn leather jacket and faded jeans. His handsome, angular face was rugged, marked by faint scars across his cheekbone and eyebrow, scars that hinted at dangerous stories he never told. It was Nash. His eyes, sharp as razors, swept over Abby's property, assessing the situation in an instant, like a predator surveying its territory. "What happened?" Nash asked immediately, his voice low and direct, wasting no words on greetings. "Ranger's gone," Abby breathed, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "I just got a call from the prison. Ethan wants to see him one last time, before morning. But when I called him, he wasn't here. The porch window was forced, his leash was cut. Someone came in and took him, Nash. They had to. And Ethan, he's almost out of time. Completely." Tears began to well in her eyes. Nash swore softly under his breath. He didn't waste time with useless questions. He pulled an older but seemingly secure flip phone from his jacket pocket. "Mac, listen up. We have a situation. Code Shepherd. The dog's been snatched. Right from Foster's place. Not just any dog. This is Ethan Cole's dog. Dig deep. Find out who could be behind this. Anyone with a reason to stop that final meeting. Move fast." He snapped the phone shut and turned back to Abby, his gaze intensely focused. "Anything unusual lately? Strange cars? Anyone hanging around?" As Nash spoke, Abby forced herself to think, pushing past the panic. An image flickered. "Yesterday? Yeah, last night," she mumbled. "When I was cleaning up late at the clinic. I saw a black sedan, couldn't see the plates, tinted windows. It drove past my house really slow. Twice, maybe 3 times. I thought I imagined it, or maybe someone was lost. But now..." Nash gave a curt nod, his eyes calculating. "That's a start. Black sedan, this area, possibly connected to stopping Ethan. Not much, but enough for Mac to work with." He opened the passenger door of the Charger. "Get in. We don't have much time." Abby didn't hesitate, wiping away her tears and scrambling into the Charger. The car roared to life and tore into the night, leaving the small, lonely house behind. The desperate race to save Ranger, and perhaps Ethan too, had officially begun. Meanwhile, in some dark corner of the city, in an abandoned industrial area by the river, Ranger strained against the heavy metal chain attached to his sturdy collar. The clinking echoed in the vast, damp space of the warehouse. The dog let out low growls deep in his throat, his large ears pricked, alert to the slightest sound. His nose twitched constantly, trying to identify the unfamiliar, threatening scents. The warehouse was swallowed by darkness, dimly lit by a single bare bulb dangling from high above, its weak yellow light flickering as if about to die, creating bizarre dancing shadows on the peeling walls and stacks of old, dust-covered crates. The air hung thick with the smell of oil, rust, and damp decay. A man in an expensive but rumpled gray suit, looking utterly out of place, leaned against a stack of wooden crates. He had a smug face, his beady eyes constantly darting towards Ranger with a mixture of morbid fascination and contempt. "Nice dog," he said condescendingly, taking a long drag from the cigarette smoldering between his fingers, the white smoke curling in the air. "Smart, loyal. Too bad you're in the wrong place at the wrong time." Another man, thinner, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face, emerged from the deeper shadows of the warehouse. He moved lightly like a cat, his ice-cold eyes glinting beneath the hood. "Orders are just to hold him until morning. Don't hurt him. For now." His voice was flat, emotionless. The man in the suit shrugged nonchalantly, flicking his cigarette butt onto the cracked concrete floor. "That depends on whether our friend Ethan decides to cooperate, when he finds out his last little gift isn't coming." He smirked. "Or depends on whether anyone knows he comes looking." At the sound of Ethan's name, Ranger suddenly erupted in fierce, echoing barks. He thrashed more violently, trying to break the chain. Instinct told him his master was in danger, that he had to get back. Somehow he knew Ethan needed him. And he would fight with all his might to escape this place. The two men flinched back a step at the animal's unexpected ferocity. Back at Oakhaven Jail, Ethan sat motionless on the bunk, his back against the cold wall. He stared blankly at the narrow sliver of light filtering through the small barred window high above, his only connection to the outside world. Time stretched endlessly. Each tick of the clock in the hallway hammered against his dwindling patience. Just a few more hours, and if the warden couldn't do anything, it would all truly be over. Despair began to creep in heavier than the chains. The sound of urgent footsteps in the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. The cell door opened again. The stone-faced guard entered, followed by Warden Miller. But this time, the warden's expression held none of its earlier hesitation or curiosity. Instead, it was grave and somewhat bewildered. "Cole, we have a problem," Warden Miller said bluntly, his voice tight. "Your dog, he's missing." Ethan felt the blood freeze in his veins. He shot to his feet, the handcuffs clanging together. "Missing? What do you mean?" "The woman caring for him, Miss Foster, reported that the dog was taken from her home just minutes after I called her," the warden explained, disbelief clear on his face. Window forced, leash cut. This wasn't him just wandering off. Ethan struggled to breathe, trying to process the shocking information. "What? Who would do that?" "We don't know," the warden shook his head. "Local police have been notified and are en route to Miss Foster's house. But..." He paused, looking directly into Ethan's eyes. "This happened right after you made the request and I contacted her. The timing is too coincidental to be random." Ethan's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. His last request, the one thing that had kept a fragile shred of hope alive for 5 years, hadn't just been denied, it had been cruelly snatched away. But it wasn't just cruelty. The warden was right. This couldn't be random. Someone didn't want him to see Ranger. Someone had acted immediately upon learning of his request. But who? And more importantly, why? Why was a final meeting between a dying prisoner and his dog worth orchestrating a brazen kidnapping? A cold dread snaked down Ethan's spine. This was far more complicated than he'd thought. It wasn't just about him, it was about Ranger too. "Please, Warden," Ethan pleaded, his voice urgent. "Find him. Find out who's behind this." "We're doing everything we can, Cole," the warden replied, but his tone lacked conviction. "I'll stay in contact with the police." Ethan watched the warden leave, a surge of helplessness and rage building inside him. He knew the local police wouldn't be fast enough, wouldn't have the resources. If Ranger had truly been kidnapped for some dark reason, the chances of finding him before dawn were slim to none. Unless Abby had called Nash. Another tiny flicker of hope ignited. Nash's Dodge Charger flew through the deserted city streets near midnight, its V8 engine roaring like a wounded beast. Streetlights flashed across Nash's focused face, his eyes constantly scanning the road and rearview mirrors. He was on another call, his voice calm but authoritative. "Mac got a lead. Black sedan reported near an old industrial park, South Docks, last night. There's an abandoned warehouse there, Unit 7B. High probability they're holding the dog there. I'm heading in. Need backup if things get complicated. Stand by." He ended the call and glanced at Abby. "You sure you want to go in there? Could get dangerous." Abby clenched her fists, her gaze resolute. "That's Ranger in there. Ethan's dog. I'm not sitting here waiting." Every precious second ticking away was a physical ache. If they didn't find Ranger in time, Ethan would die never knowing the truth, never seeing his loyal friend again. The pre-dawn twilight of the city cast an eerie glow over the docklands. Cold fog swirled dimly off the river between the rows of rusting, long-abandoned corrugated iron warehouses. Water lapped softly against the concrete pier walls, punctuated by the mournful cries of distant gulls. Nash steered the Charger into a dark alley, hidden behind a row of rusty shipping containers, killing the lights and engine. He retrieved a semi-automatic pistol from under the driver's seat, checking the magazine with practiced ease. "Stay in the car. Lock the doors," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. But Abby's eyes flashed with defiance. "Forget it, Nash. I told you. That's Ranger in there." Nash looked at her for a long moment, recognizing the unshakable determination. He let out a barely audible sigh. "All right. But stick close. Don't leave my side no matter what. If there's any sign of trouble, you run straight back to the car, don't worry about me. Got it?" Abby nodded firmly. Together they moved cautiously towards Warehouse 7B. The building looked dilapidated and broken, several windows shattered, panels of siding ripped away. Nash pressed himself against the cold metal wall, moving carefully towards a grimy window, trying to peer inside without making a sound. The dim light from the single bulb inside cast enough illumination for Nash to assess the situation. Shadows moved vaguely. Two men, the one in the suit pacing nervously, the other in the hoodie sitting on an old stool looking alert. And in the center of the room, chained to a large steel pillar, but standing tall, ears pricked, eyes watchful, was Ranger. He was safe, at least physically. Two of them, Nash whispered to Abby, who was huddled behind him. Could be more in the shadows. Suit looks like the point man here. Hoodie's armed. He'd caught the glint of a handgun tucked into the hooded man's waistband. Plan is to neutralize the door guard first, then deal with the other one. Fast and quiet. Abby swallowed hard, her heart pounding, but she nodded. She bent down and picked up a rusty piece of pipe lying on the ground, gripping it tightly. We can't waste any more time. Nash allowed himself a rare, confident smirk. I like your attitude. In a swift, almost silent motion, he picked up a small pebble and threw it hard against the metal wall on the opposite side of the entrance. Clang. The unexpected noise echoed inside the quiet warehouse. Both men inside jumped. Ranger let out a sharp bark. What was that? The man in the suit snapped irritably. Dunno. Probably rats or something, the hooded man replied, but he stood up anyway. Let me check it out just in case. He drew his pistol, racking the slide with a dry click, and moved cautiously towards the partially open main door. It was the opening Nash had waited for. The moment the hooded man stepped onto the threshold, before he could get his bearings, Nash exploded from the shadows like a phantom. He seized the man's gun arm, expertly twisting it behind his back, causing the weapon to clatter to the ground. Simultaneously, he delivered a sharp elbow strike to the man's temple. The man let out a grunt and crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Not bad, Abby whispered, breathing heavily from the tension, but her eyes held grudging admiration for Nash's skill. Inside, hearing the commotion and perhaps catching Abby's familiar scent, Ranger began barking louder, a mix of excitement and warning. He'd heard her. But the barking also alerted the remaining man in the suit. He spun around, his face contorting in panic as he saw his accomplice downed. He was unarmed, but instead of running he did something insane. He lunged towards Ranger, grabbed the chain, and pressed a switchblade he'd just flicked open from his pocket against the dog's throat. Stay back. Don't move, he shrieked, his voice thin with fear but trying to sound menacing. One more step and the dog dies. Abby froze, her hand tightening on the pipe. She didn't dare move. But Nash, having quickly disarmed and bound the unconscious hooded man, just gave a cold smirk. You have no idea who you're dealing with. He looked straight at the man in the suit, then gave a subtle hand signal towards Ranger. Before the man in the suit could comprehend what was happening, or perhaps sensing the signal from Nash and Abby's presence, Ranger, despite the knife at his throat and the taut chain, acted. With an enraged growl, he suddenly yanked hard on the chain with incredible strength, throwing the man off balance. At the same instant, he twisted his body, ramming his shoulder hard into the man's chest. The man stumbled backward, the knife falling from his grasp and clattering on the floor. But Ranger wasn't finished. He lunged, not biting, but using his weight and ferocity to knock the man flat onto the dusty concrete. Just then, several blocks away, Warden Miller received an urgent call. He listened intently, his expression growing increasingly serious, then astonished. He immediately ordered his driver to turn around and sped back towards the death row holding area. Cole, he yelled as he neared the cell. There's new information. Come with me. Now. Ethan, lost in despair, snapped his head up, heart pounding. What was going on? Back in the abandoned warehouse, Ranger had the man in the suit pinned. The chain still dangled from his collar, but it was no longer a restraint. He stood over the sprawled man, growling low in his throat, baring his impressive, sharp teeth menacingly, but holding back the attack. Ranger back. Good boy. Abby rushed forward, her voice filled with relief and pride. She quickly unhooked the chain from the steel pillar. Nash approached, kicking the fallen knife and pistol away. He pointed his gun at the man pinned beneath Ranger. "If I were you, I wouldn't move a muscle," he said coolly. The man blinked in terror at the snarling dog inches from his face, then quickly raised his hands in surrender. "Okay. You don't know what you've gotten yourselves into," he gasped, pale with fear. Nash bent down, grabbing his collar and hauling him partly up. "Then explain it to us. Why snatch the dog?" Abby knelt beside Ranger, throwing her arms around his neck, stroking his thick fur reassuringly. "It's okay, brave boy. It's okay. We'll get you back to Ethan." Ranger nuzzled her hand, his growls subsiding. But just then from outside they heard the squeal of tires on pavement. Multiple car doors slammed hard, followed by the sound of running feet and crackling radio chatter echoing towards them. "Damn it. They're back up," Nash muttered, urgency flashing in his eyes. "They got here faster than expected. Must have tracked us or the car. We need to move now." Abby glanced quickly towards the back of the warehouse, another exit leading to the rear alley. "That way." Nash didn't need telling twice. He yanked the man in the suit to his feet. "You're coming with us. Maybe Ethan has a few questions for you." Sensing the urgency in their voices, Ranger immediately shifted his attention from the captive and moved close to Abby's side, watching the main entrance warily. They moved swiftly through the dim warehouse, Nash leading, still gripping the prisoner, Abby and Ranger close behind. Just as they disappeared into the shadows at the far end, they heard the main doors burst open and shouts from the front. "They're not here. Check the back exit." Then the sharp crack of a gunshot echoed, the bullet slamming into a nearby metal drum, sending sparks flying. The chase had just gotten deadly. Ethan sat rigidly in the back of the prisoner transport van, handcuffs still biting into his wrists. His heart hammered like a drum. Warden Miller sat beside him, his expression still tense but slightly relieved. The van was moving quickly through familiar streets, but not towards the courthouse or any other official facility. "I don't know exactly what the hell is going on, Cole," Warden Miller said quietly, low enough for only Ethan to hear, "but it seems your dog wasn't just found. He was rescued by someone, apparently some kind of unofficial federal operative named Nash. I received direct orders from very high up to halt all execution procedures and cooperate fully with this individual. You're being temporarily transferred to his custody." Ethan's heart leaped. Ranger rescued? Federal operative? Very high up. What was happening? Where's my dog? Is he okay? That was all he cared about right now. "We're on our way to meet them," the warden replied tersely, looking out the window. Ethan leaned back against the cold metal wall and closed his eyes. A whirlwind of emotions washed over him, relief that Ranger was safe, utter confusion about the situation, and a faint fear that this might be some elaborate trap. But he knew one thing for sure: if Ranger was alive and nearby, then hope, however fragile, still existed. The van suddenly slowed and pulled into what looked like the parking lot of a deserted roadside motel. Through the small barred window, Ethan saw the familiar black Dodge Charger parked there, its headlights still on. The back doors of the van opened. 2 guards stepped in, preparing to escort him out. And then he heard it. A deep, rough bark, but filled with an unmistakable excitement. The bark he had committed to memory over 5 long years. "Oof, oof." Ethan's heart stopped, then pounded furiously. He stepped out of the van, squinting in the dim parking lot light. Suddenly, a furry black and tan blur shot out from beside the Charger, fast as lightning. A solid, warm body covered in familiar fur slammed into him. The force of the impact knocked Ethan off balance, sending him stumbling to his knees on the cold asphalt. He felt a wet, cold nose nuzzling his cheek, frantic, sloppy licks on his face, his hands and a thick tail thumping wildly against his legs, the dog's entire body trembling with joy and emotion. "Ranger!" Ethan choked out, his voice breaking. He wrapped his arms fiercely around his loyal friend, burying his face in the dog's thick fur, inhaling the familiar scent. Hot tears he had suppressed for 5 long years finally broke free, streaming down his cheeks. 5 years apart. 5 years of agony and despair. And now, finally, Ranger was here in his arms. Through tear-blurred eyes, Ethan saw Warden Miller standing a short distance away, silently observing the emotional reunion. After a moment that seemed to stretch forever, the warden signaled to Nash, who had just emerged from the Charger with Abby, to approach. They exchanged a few brief words Ethan couldn't hear. Then the warden handed Nash a folder of papers. Nash glanced at them quickly and signed without reading closely. Warden Miller nodded, gave Ethan one last, meaningful look and turned back to the van. Per the new orders, you're temporarily in the agent's custody, the warden called back before closing the door. You have 48 hours until a new hearing is scheduled or the case is officially reopened based on new evidence. Good luck, Cole. The guards followed the warden into the van, and it quickly pulled away, disappearing into the night. Ethan remained kneeling on the ground, clutching Ranger. He looked up, watching the van leave with a stunned expression. Then he turned back, seeing Nash and Abby approaching. His gaze fell on the man in the suit, bruised and battered, hands tied behind his back, held firmly by Nash. Ethan's eyes narrowed, hardening. Who is this? Abby stepped forward, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. One of the men who took Ranger, Ethan. One of the men who didn't want you to see him again. Ethan slowly got to his feet, Ranger still pressed against his leg. His eyes grew cold, his shoulders tensing threateningly. He looked directly into the eyes of the trembling captive. Then he better tell me why. They quickly hustled the man in the suit into a cheap nearby motel room Nash had secured. Without wasting time, Nash bound him securely to the room's single wooden chair. Ethan stood menacingly before him, fists clenched, veins standing out on the backs of his hands. Ranger lay at Ethan's feet, his amber eyes fixed on the captive, letting out occasional low warning growls. Talk. Ethan's voice was low and powerful. The man hesitated, his eyes darting around the shabby room, then back to Ethan's burning gaze and the dog baring its teeth nearby. He swallowed hard, but then a twisted smirk appeared on his bruised face. You think you've won, Cole? You cheat death, get your dog back. But you have no idea what you just dragged everyone into. Ethan's eyes remained ice-cold, unwavering. Then enlighten me. This isn't just about you, the man said, his voice raspy. It's bigger than you. Much, much bigger. Bigger than all of you. Nash quietly took out his pistol, slowly checking the action, the dry clicks echoing in the quiet room. I'm a reasonably patient man, Nash said evenly, his eyes never leaving the captive. But my patience has limits. Especially when my friends are in danger. The man swallowed thickly. Sweat beaded on his forehead. You think this is just some simple power play? Your dog wasn't kidnapped just to mess with your head, Ethan. He was supposed to be eliminated right after we grabbed him. Abby frowned, stepping closer. What? Why kill Ranger? The captive remained stubbornly silent, jaw clenched. But then Ranger took another step towards him, bared his teeth, and let out a deep, menacing rumble right in his face. That growl seemed to touch the man's primal fear. The terror in his eyes quickly overwhelmed his defiance. Because the dog knows something, he stammered. Or rather, because he's carrying something nobody was supposed to see. Ethan's stomach clenched. Ranger? Carrying something? He whispered the dog's name, then slowly knelt before him, his expression uncomprehending. Ranger tilted his head, looking at his master, as if sensing he was searching for something important. Ethan gently ran trembling fingers through the thick fur around Ranger's neck, where Abby had put his leather collar. And then, his fingers brushed against something hard, small, tucked very discreetly right under the metal buckle. Ethan's heart hammered. His hands shook more violently as he carefully worked the object free. It was a tiny black USB flash drive, wrapped in electrical tape for waterproofing and concealment. It was so small it was almost unnoticeable without a thorough search. Ethan's gaze shot instantly to the man in the suit, filled with fury and disbelief. What's on this? The man, perhaps knowing it was over for him, gave a bitter, weary smirk. The truth, Cole. The truth you've been looking for these past 5 years. And the truth that's going to bring down a lot of powerful people. Ethan stared at the tiny drive in his palm. 5 years rotting in prison, 5 years screaming into the void, 5 years living on the faith that justice would come. And now, the key to his freedom, the proof of his innocence, was in a tiny storage device hidden on his most loyal companion. Abby looked worriedly at Nash. "We need somewhere secure to see what's on this. Right now." Nash nodded decisively. "I know a place." He turned back, leveling his gun at the man in the suit. "But first he's going to tell us a few more things. Who gave him his orders? Who's at the top?" The captive slumped in the chair, letting out a long sigh as if a burden had been lifted. "You guessed it. I'm just hired muscle, a small cog. The guy behind it, he's got immense power, eyes and ears everywhere. You just kicked a hornet's nest." Ethan's patience snapped. "Tell us exactly what's on this drive, and who the mastermind is, or else." The captive glanced fearfully at Ranger's bared teeth and hissed through clenched jaws, "International bank transfer records. Shady deals worth millions. Proof the whole case was framed to pin it on you. Names of politicians, big-shot businessmen, people who did everything in their power to make sure you died quietly. You weren't just innocent, Ethan. You were the only obstacle in the way of their illegal operations, a threat they had to eliminate at all costs." Ethan gritted his teeth. He'd always known it deep down. He was just a pawn to be sacrificed. "Who's at the top? Give us the name," Abby demanded, her voice cold and firm. The man fell silent again, sweat pouring down his face. Nash cocked the hammer of his pistol, the metallic click sounding again. "This is your last chance to save your skin." A tense silence filled the room. The captive opened his mouth to speak. Crack. A sharp gunshot rang out, but not from Nash's weapon. Outside, through the motel room window, a muzzle flash flared briefly in the darkness. The window pane shattered. The man in the suit's eyes flew wide in horror, a dark red hole appearing squarely in the center of his forehead. He didn't make a sound as he slumped forward in the chair, killed instantly. "Damn it! Get down!" Nash yelled, reacting instantly, shoving both Ethan and Abby hard onto the floor just as another bullet slammed into the wall behind them, exploding plaster. Someone outside had been watching them. Someone wanted to make sure the captive never spoke that final name. "They know we're here. We have to get out now," Abby yelled, her heart feeling like it would burst. Nash said nothing, snatching the USB drive from Ethan's stunned hand, stuffing it quickly into his jacket pocket, and lunging towards the back door of the motel room. Ranger, with sharp instinct, moved silently and swiftly at his heels, ears pricked. Outside, tires squealed again. The headlights of a familiar black SUV swept through the alley behind the motel. "It's them? The guys from the warehouse," Abby cried out, recognizing the vehicle. Nash took cover behind a large metal dumpster at the end of the alley. "Then let's end this quickly." He raised his pistol, checked it again, and fired back towards the approaching SUV. Bullets sparked off metal. "Ethan, Abby, get to the car," Nash yelled, laying down covering fire while signaling them towards the Charger parked nearby. Ethan and Abby sprinted towards the muscle car, Ranger leaping into the back seat the moment Abby wrenched the door open. "As soon as we're clear, we have to get what's on this drive out there," Abby said urgently, gasping for breath. Ethan was already behind the wheel, firing up the Charger's engine, which roared defiantly. "Hold on." He slammed his foot on the gas. The car shot forward like an arrow, launching out of the alley and disappearing into the night, leaving the sounds of gunfire and the deadly pursuit behind them. 24 hours later, on a TV screen in another anonymous motel room, in another city, a female news reporter stood in front of the Capitol building, her voice filled with excitement. "In a development that has shocked the nation, irrefutable evidence from a USB drive anonymously delivered to our newsroom and law enforcement agencies has exposed a massive conspiracy involving corruption and obstruction of justice, which nearly cost an innocent man his life. The conspiracy allegedly involves high-ranking politicians and top corporate leaders in a multi-year international money laundering and bribery scandal. Ethan Cole, the man wrongly convicted and scheduled for execution just yesterday, has now been fully and officially exonerated by the Supreme Court and immediately released. Arrest warrants for the masterminds have been issued." Ethan Cole sat quietly in an old chair, his eyes glued to the screen. Beside him, Abby let out a soft sigh of relief, her hand stroking the soft fur on the head of Ranger, who lay contentedly at her feet, his tail giving an occasional thump. Nash leaned against a nearby wall, arms crossed, his face still impassive but a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. We did it, Ethan," Abby said softly, her voice still trembling with emotion. Ethan took a deep breath, savoring the taste of freedom for the first time in 5 long years. 5 years of dread, fear, and despair. 5 years locked within cold concrete walls. Now he had his life back, his honor restored. He looked down, meeting Ranger's intelligent amber eyes. "You saved me, boy," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. "You saved all of us." Ranger whined softly and nuzzled his hand as if understanding. But then Ethan's expression hardened. The relief was temporary. But the people who orchestrated all this, the ones who ordered the hits, who kidnapped Ranger, the ones really pulling the strings, they're still out there. Justice hasn't been fully served. Nash offered a cold, knowing smirk. "Well then, maybe we'll just have to go find them ourselves and make sure they pay for what they've done." Ethan stood up, a fire of determination in his eyes. He called Ranger to his side. The fight for survival and exoneration was over, but a new fight, the fight for true justice, the fight against the shadowy forces still lurking, was just beginning. He walked decisively towards the door, ready to face whatever came next, his most loyal companion ever vigilant at his side. Justice had been revealed, but the journey to reclaim it was far from over. And this time Ethan Cole wouldn't be alone. Part 2, Hunt in the Shadows. 6 months had passed since Ethan Cole's exoneration. 6 months since the tiny USB drive hidden on Ranger's collar exposed part of a vast network of corruption, shaking the political and business worlds. But the aftershocks of the scandal seemed to have settled with suspicious quiet. A few scapegoats were arrested, a few sensational headlines faded into oblivion, replaced by other current events. The world seemed to have moved on, but for Ethan, Abby, and Nash, life was still far from normal. They were hiding out in an isolated cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a temporary safe house arranged by Nash through his mysterious contacts. Outside, winter snow blanketed the landscape, creating a scene of peaceful silence. But inside the cozy cabin with its crackling fireplace, the air was thick with constant vigilance. Ethan tried to adapt to his freedom, but 5 years of wrongful imprisonment and the harrowing events that followed had left invisible scars. He often woke startled in the night, drenched in cold sweat, haunted by faces from the past or a vague fear of those still lurking beyond the law's reach. During the day he spent his time reading, helping Abby care for Ranger, or practicing the basic self-defense skills Nash reluctantly taught him. His eyes no longer held the despair of a death row inmate, but shone with resolve and a cold determination. He knew his fight wasn't over. Abby, with her inherent kindness and resilience, was the group's emotional anchor. She was Ranger's veterinarian, a confidant, listening to Ethan's unspoken burdens. The bond between her and Ethan deepened, built on trust and the life-or-death experiences they'd shared, though neither was ready to define their relationship. She still kept in touch with her old veterinary clinic via encrypted email, managing her work remotely with difficulty, constantly worried about the animals and colleagues back home. Nash kept them safe but also brought the most worrying news. He was like a ghost, often disappearing for days only to reappear suddenly with the latest intelligence from Mac, his mysterious contact. Nash's scarred face remained unervingly calm, but his sharp eyes never stopped observing. He knew better than anyone that the real mastermind, the one the man in the suit in the warehouse hadn't named before being shot, was still out there. This person, whom Mac tentatively dubbed Silas Thorne, based on informational fragments, was the architect behind everything, powerful and ruthless, with an impossibly far-reaching network. Ranger, the loyal German shepherd, seemed the only creature enjoying the relative peace. He stayed close to Ethan and Abby, relishing their affection and walks in the snowy woods under Nash's watchful eye. But his instincts remained sharp. Sometimes he would suddenly jolt upright, growling softly toward the window or the forest, ears pricked in alertness, reminding everyone that danger was always lurking. One late winter afternoon, Nash returned from a 3-day trip, his face colder than the snowy wind outside. He placed a slim briefcase on the oak dining table. "News," Nash said curtly, his voice devoid of emotion. "Mac confirms. Silas Thorne. He not only evaded implication in the initial scandal, but he's consolidating power. He knows we got the USB, knows we're the only ones left alive who know part of the truth, and more importantly, he knows where we are." Ethan and Abby looked at each other, hearts sinking. The false peace they had tried to build was shattering. "How does he know?" Abby asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Thorne has eyes and ears everywhere," Nash replied. "A few corrupt officials in the system were exposed, but many others remain loyal to him. He's been tracking us for a while. Perhaps just waiting for the right moment to strike." "So what does he want?" Ethan asked, his hands clenching into fists. "He wants to silence us permanently," Nash stated flatly. "And he wants back any information we still have. That USB was just a small piece of his data cache. Mac believes there might be backups or other clues we haven't found yet." The air in the cabin grew heavy. Silence descended, broken only by the crackling fire. "We can't keep running like this," Ethan spoke, breaking the silence. His voice was firm. "We can't live in fear, waiting for him to make his move. We have to act first." Abby looked at Ethan, saw the fire of determination in his eyes. She knew he was right. "But what can we do? There are 3 of us and a dog against the Shadow Empire." "We have the element of surprise," Nash said, opening the briefcase. Inside were satellite photos, diagrams, and dense handwritten notes. "Thorne doesn't know we know who he is. He also doesn't know we're planning a countermove. Mac has found a few weaknesses, links in his network we can exploit." He spread a large map on the table. "Thorne has an important meeting with international partners at a secluded resort in the Swiss Alps in 2 weeks. This is a rare opportunity to get close to him, or at least gather more evidence." Ethan looked at the map, then at Nash and Abby. "We're going." Abby hesitated slightly. "To Switzerland? Confront him directly?" "Nash, that's too dangerous." "Hiding here is just as dangerous, Abby," Ethan said gently but firmly. "At least if we act, we have a chance to control the situation, a chance to end this once and for all." Nash nodded in agreement. "We won't engage directly unless we have no other choice. The primary goal is gathering more evidence, especially the identities of his partners and their specific operations. If we succeed, we can pass it on to trustworthy people." He looked at Ethan and Abby. "But I need to know you're both ready for this. There's no turning back." Abby looked at Ethan, then looked at Ranger lying quietly at her feet, his intelligent eyes seemingly listening. She took a deep breath. "I'm ready. For Ethan. For Ranger. For all of us." Ethan placed a hand on Abby's shoulder, his gaze filled with gratitude and resolve. "Then let's make Silas Thorne regret ever crossing us." The hunt in the shadows had officially begun. Next stop, the majestic but treacherous Alps. Chapter 2, Preparations and Portents. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of hurried, tense preparation. The quiet cabin became a makeshift command center. Nash used his secure communication channels to coordinate with Mac, gathering more details about the luxurious resort, Le Sommet Etoile, the starry peak, where Thorne would hold his meeting. They studied building schematics, projected schedules, guest lists, even if only aliases or code names, and most importantly, the security measures. Security at Le Sommet Etoile was described as fortress level. State-of-the-art surveillance cameras, motion sensors, heavily armed and highly trained private security, not to mention the personal bodyguards of Thorne and his partners. Infiltration seemed nearly impossible. "We can't go in the front door," Nash declared after hours of study. "We need cover. Or another way in." Ethan, who had spent time reviewing old case files related to his own case and the information Mac provided, suddenly had an idea. Among the shell companies Thorne used, there was one that specialized in high-end catering for major events. Called Gourmet Global. "Could we?" Nash raised an eyebrow, typing quickly on his encrypted laptop. After a few minutes he nodded. Gourmet Global is indeed the exclusive food supplier for Le Summit Étoile during the week of the event. Mac could forge credentials for one or two of us as temporary staff. It's a way inside but high risk. Security checks will be intense. I can do it, Abby spoke up unexpectedly. I waited tables during college. I know the kitchen and service routines. Maybe I'll arouse less suspicion. Ethan objected immediately. No, Abby, it's too dangerous. Ethan's right, Nash agreed. But she has a point. A woman working service staff might blend in easier than two unfamiliar men. Ethan and I will find another way to provide support from outside or infiltrate via a discreet route Mac is trying to pinpoint, perhaps service tunnels or old ventilation systems. After some debate, they decided Abby would pose as a Gourmet Global server, using false papers provided by Mac. She would be their eyes and ears inside, trying to gather intel, photos, or any clues she could. Ethan and Nash would attempt to breach the resort's technical or security areas to disable cameras, create opportunities for Abby to move, or search for more crucial evidence if possible. Meanwhile, Ranger would have to stay behind at a secure location nearby, possibly a remote farm Nash knew. Bringing Ranger into the resort was out of the question. The decision saddened both Ethan and Abby, but they knew it was necessary. Ranger seemed dejected, sensing the arrangement, but remained obedient. The final days before departure grew even more tense. Abby practiced her serving skills, memorized the resort layout and committed faces, however blurry the photos, of persons of interest to memory. Ethan focused on physical conditioning and basic combat skills with Nash, learning how to move silently, neutralize opponents quickly, and use simple tech gadgets. Nash was in constant contact with Mac, refining the plan and prepping the necessary gear. Miniature listening devices, hidden cameras, signal jammers, and, of course, weapons. However, there was an unsettling sign that worried Nash. Mac, his reliable and highly effective contact, suddenly became harder to reach in the last few days. Replies were delayed, and the information provided sometimes seemed vague. Something wrong with Mac? Abby asked, noticing Nash's frown. Not sure, Nash muttered. Could be he's having trouble accessing info due to Thorn tightening security. Or maybe, something else. He didn't voice the fear that Mac might be compromised or in danger. That would be a devastating blow to their plan. The night before their departure, as Abby was packing the last essential items, she saw an unfamiliar car parked down the road leading to their cabin, its headlights off. It stopped for only a few minutes, then pulled away silently. It could have been someone lost, but in their situation, every anomaly felt suspicious. Nash, Ethan, she called softly. I think there was a strange car. Nash and Ethan rushed to the window, but the car had vanished into the night and the increasingly heavy snowfall. Probably nothing, Ethan said, trying to reassure Abby and himself. But Nash shook his head, his eyes sharp. Nothing is coincidence. Thorn knows we're making a move. He's sending a warning. Or worse, reconnaissance. He checked his weapon again. We have to be doubly careful. From this moment on, trust no one, nothing. The trip to Switzerland was no longer just an intelligence-gathering mission. It had become a race against time and death. The enemy knew they were coming. Chapter 3, The Alps Await. Dawn broke over the snow-capped peaks, painting the cold winter sky pink. Inside the log cabin, the air was silent but thick with tension. Backpacks were packed, forged documents tucked into wallets, weapons and gear checked one last time. It was time to go. The hardest moment was saying goodbye to Ranger. The dog seemed to understand what was happening. He whined softly, nuzzling Ethan's hand, then looked at Abby with sad eyes. Ethan knelt, hugging his loyal friend tightly. I'll come back, boy, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. I promise I'll come back. You be a good boy and wait here. Abby hugged Ranger too, tears welling in her eyes. We'll be back soon. Take care. Nash had arranged for a reliable old farmer, an old acquaintance of his from a nearby valley, to come and look after Ranger. The old man arrived on time, his face weathered but his eyes kind. He nodded to Nash, asking no questions, and gently led Ranger away. Watching the loyal dog's figure disappear behind the trees, all three felt a real sense of loss, as if their last safety line had been cut. The mission now felt more personal than ever. They left the cabin, locking the door securely, erasing any trace of their presence. The old pickup truck took them to a small regional airport, where they boarded a domestic flight to a larger city. From there, using the brand new passports and identities provided by Mac, the last things they received before contact was lost, they caught an international flight to Geneva, Switzerland. Silence dominated the long journey. Each was lost in their own thoughts, but they shared a constant sense of unease. They tried to act normal, like ordinary travelers, but their eyes were always vigilant, scanning for faces that might be watching, for suspicious gestures. At the Geneva airport security checkpoint, Ethan's heart pounded when an officer studied his fake passport a little too long, but then he stamped it and handed it back without a word. A close call. From Geneva, they rented an inconspicuous car and drove towards the majestic Alps. The scenery outside the windows was breathtaking: crystal-clear lakes, quaint villages nestled at the foot of mountains, and snow-white peaks rising proudly against the deep blue sky. But the beauty held a cold, distant feeling, as if hiding dangerous secrets. They reached a small, quiet town a few miles from Les Sommets-Étoiles and rented 2 separate rooms at a modest inn, trying to maintain the lowest possible profile. That night, they gathered in Nash's room to review the plan one last time. Layouts of the resort, the event schedule, however sparse, lists of potential entry and exit points. Everything was spread out on the creaky bed. Abby tried on the pale gray gourmet global uniform. She looked professional enough, but couldn't hide the anxiety in her eyes. She double-checked the tiny brooch, actually a hidden camera, and the burner phone preloaded with short, encrypted message formats. Nash tried contacting Mac again via the secure channel. This time he picked up an extremely faint signal that lasted only a few seconds before cutting out completely. No message, just static. "Contact is completely lost," Nash announced, his voice low. "We can't count on Mac anymore. Any intel we have now could be outdated or inaccurate. We're on our own and we'll have to improvise." Ethan squeezed Abby's hand. "Be careful, Abby. No unnecessary risks. The main goal is observation and intel gathering. If anything feels wrong, get out immediately." "I know," Abby nodded, trying to appear strong. "You too." The next morning, a small gourmet global van picked up Abby and a few other temporary staff at the designated meeting point in town. Her heart hammered as she climbed aboard. She cast one last look towards the inn window, where she knew Ethan and Nash were watching. The van rolled away, taking her into the lion's den. Ethan and Nash stood silently, watching the van disappear. A feeling of helplessness washed over them. Now Abby's fate and perhaps the mission's rested in her hands. They turned back inside, preparing for their part, finding a way into the fortress that was Les Sommets-Étoiles. The real game had begun. Les Sommets-Étoiles appeared before Abby like a crystal palace perched on the mountaintop. Modern architecture blended seamlessly with classic lines, gleaming glass and steel reflecting the sunlight off the white snow. But the opulent exterior couldn't hide the tense atmosphere within. Right from the staff security checkpoint, Abby felt the intense scrutiny. Guards with radios and earpieces stood at every corner, their sharp eyes scanning everyone. Her ID card was scanned multiple times, her face cross-referenced against a database. Fortunately, Mac's preparations, before contact was lost, were good enough for her to pass through without incident, though her heart still hammered against her ribs. Entering the staff logistics area, Abby was momentarily stunned by the luxury even behind the scenes. But she quickly composed herself, blending into the bustling flow of people preparing for the upcoming event. She was assigned to the beverage service team for the welcome cocktail party that evening. This was a good opportunity to observe. In her neat uniform, carrying a tray of wine and champagne, Abby moved among the crowd of wealthy and powerful guests. They conversed in multiple languages, dressed in stunning attire, adorned with glittering jewelry. Personal bodyguards stood discreetly interspersed among them, eyes and ears constantly alert. Abby maintained a professional demeanor, smiling appropriately, but her eyes and ears were working overtime. The camera on her brooch silently recorded everything. She caught fragments of conversation, mostly about business, multi-million-dollar deals, veiled references to emerging markets, or innovative logistics solutions. Phrases that sounded innocuous but could be code for illicit activities. She tried to match faces to the aliases Nash had provided. Suddenly, a cold voice spoke right behind her. "You're new, aren't you?" Abby startled and turned. A middle-aged man in an impeccable black suit, likely a senior security manager for the resort, was staring at her, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Yes, sir. I'm temporary staff from Gourmet Global," Abby replied, struggling to keep her voice steady, her heart threatening to leap out of her chest. "Your ID." He held out his hand. Abby's hand trembled slightly as she gave him the ID. He examined it closely, then looked directly into her eyes. "Do your job carefully. There's no room for error here." He handed back the card and turned away, but Abby felt his gaze linger on her for a moment longer. She knew she'd been noticed. Just then, a small commotion at the main entrance drew everyone's attention. A group entered, led by a tall man with neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair, wearing an expensive charcoal gray suit. His face was cold, radiating an aura of absolute power and underlying ruthlessness. Even from a distance, Abby recognized him instantly. It was Silas Thorne. He was flanked by at least 6 burly bodyguards, moving as a single unit. His eyes swept over the crowd with indifference, yet seemed to miss nothing. Seeing the enemy in the flesh, the man who had ruined Ethan's life and nearly killed Ranger, sent a shiver down Abby's spine. The danger felt more real and terrifying than ever. Meanwhile, several hundred meters from the resort, hidden in the snow-covered dense woods, Nash and Ethan faced their own challenge. They had found the entrance to the old maintenance tunnel Mac had mentioned, a rusty metal manhole cover obscured by snow and leaves. "This is it," Nash whispered, using a specialized tool to unlock the heavy cover. A gust of damp, cold air wafted up from the darkness below. They switched on their headlamps and began climbing down the slippery iron ladder. The tunnel was pitch black, narrow and filled with cobwebs. Water dripped from the stone ceiling, their footsteps echoing ominously. They moved carefully, avoiding old pipes and tangled wires. According to Mac's schematics, this tunnel should lead to an old utility room located directly beneath the resort's main kitchen area. From there, they hoped to access the camera system or at least cut power to certain areas to assist Abby. But the plan quickly hit a snag. About 50 meters in, they came upon a newly built brick wall blocking the tunnel. "Damn it!" Ethan cursed under his breath. This wall wasn't on Mac's diagrams. Thorne had it sealed off, Nash deduced, examining it closely with his flashlight. Either Mac was fed bad intel or worse, this is a trap. He listened intently. No unusual sounds. They couldn't break through the wall without making significant noise. This access point was neutralized. "Plan B," Nash said decisively. "We'll have to go back and try the ventilation system. It'll be much harder and riskier, but we don't have another choice." They silently headed back out, frustration and worry mounting. Time was running out and Abby was alone among wolves. Back inside the resort, Abby was trying to regain her composure after the encounter with the security manager. She continued her duties, moving closer to the main ballroom area where the cocktail party was in full swing. She noticed a door marked AV Control Room, authorized personnel only, slightly ajar. Perhaps someone had just left and forgotten to close it securely. A daring thought sparked in Abby's mind. If she could slip inside for just a few minutes, she might find something useful: detailed schedules, network diagrams, or even access to a computer. It was an enormous risk, but the opportunity might not come again. She glanced around. The corridor was momentarily empty. Heart pounding, she set her tray down on a nearby table, took a deep breath and gently pushed the door open, slipping into the AV control room and pulling the door almost shut behind her. The room was dark and cool, filled with electronic equipment, monitors and cables. A desktop computer was in sleep mode. Abby hurried over, jiggling the mouse to wake the screen. It demanded a password. Down. But then her eyes fell on a thin binder lying next to the keyboard, labeled Detailed Schedule and Technical Layouts Thorne Event. Her heart leaped. This was it. She quickly used the hidden camera on her brooch to photograph each page of the document as fast as she could. Just as she was capturing the last page, documenting the security system layout and camera positions that Nash and Ethan desperately needed, she heard footsteps approaching in the corridor outside. And then the doorknob began to turn. Chapter 4. Night descends on Star Peak Mountain. Abby's heart hammered against her ribs as the doorknob to the AV control room turned. There was no time left to hide. She acted on pure instinct. With a small cry, as if she'd lost her footing, she deliberately knocked over the empty drink tray from the small table near the door, creating a clatter of metal and a minor commotion just as the door swung open. The man who entered was the same stern-faced security manager who had stopped her earlier. He frowned at the mess on the floor, then fixed Abby with a scrutinizing gaze. "What are you doing in here?" "Oh, I'm so sorry," Abby stammered, feigning confusion and clumsiness. "I was just looking for a towel. I spilled a little wine on my uniform." She pointed to a small damp spot, which she had strategically created with plain water moments before. "I saw the door was slightly open, so I—" The manager continued to stare, his suspicion undiminished. His eyes flicked quickly to the computer with its glowing screen and the folder lying beside it. "Get out. Now. This area is restricted." Yes, I'm sorry," Abby murmured, lowering her head and quickly slipping out of the room, her heart still pounding like a drum. She wasn't sure if he'd bought her act, but at least she was out. More importantly, the camera hidden in her brooch had captured the precious pages of the documents. She needed to find a way to get it to Nash and Ethan immediately. She melted back into the throng of the party, trying to appear calm, searching for a secluded corner near a window where the phone signal might be a bit stronger. Hands trembling, she activated the hidden data transfer function on her burner phone, sending the document photos via a brief, heavily encrypted burst to Nash's number. The process took only a few precious seconds, but each one stretched into an eternity. Sent. A small notification flashed on the screen before erasing itself. She let out a quiet sigh of relief, but the sense of unease lingered. The security manager would definitely report the incident. She needed to leave, and soon. Meanwhile, beneath the resort, Ethan and Nash struggled through the ventilation system. The ducts were narrow, dark, dusty, and cold. They had to move slowly, carefully, avoiding any noise. Sweat dripped down their faces despite the low temperature. Just as Ethan's patience was wearing thin in the oppressive space, Nash's burner phone vibrated softly. He stopped, signaled Ethan to be silent, and checked the message. Nash's eyes narrowed as he viewed the images Abby had sent: security system schematics, camera locations, Thorne's detailed itinerary. "Abby did it," Nash whispered, his voice a mix of relief and pride. "We have the security layout. And it looks like Thorne has a private meeting in the rooftop penthouse suite in about an hour." He zoomed in on a section of the diagram. "There's an access point to the central power grid near the penthouse area, accessible from this shaft. If we can trigger a localized power outage at the right moment, it would create the diversion Abby needs to get out and maybe give us a chance to get closer," Ethan finished, immediately grasping Nash's plan. They continued moving, now with a clearer objective. Abby's diagrams were their guide. They bypassed several laser sensors thanks to the intel from the documents and finally reached a larger ventilation shaft leading up towards the technical area near the penthouse. Down below in the ballroom, Abby sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The number of security guards seemed to have increased. The probing eyes of the manager who'd caught her occasionally swept in her direction. She knew she was running out of time. She needed to get to the backup extraction point, the gourmet global delivery area behind the resort, where the catering truck would return at the end of the shift. Just then, the lights in a section of the ballroom, including the area near the AV control room and the hallway leading to the private penthouse elevator, suddenly flickered and died. Gasps of surprise and murmurs of alarm rose from the crowd. Emergency alarms began to wail, though there was no sign of fire. "Power loss in the West Wing and penthouse sector," a guard's radio crackled. "Check the power source. All security teams converge on the penthouse level." The chaos was Abby's opportunity. Taking advantage of the distracted crowd and the security forces moving in the opposite direction, she quickly moved towards the staff exit, blending in with other servers looking flustered by the incident. On the penthouse level, Nash and Ethan had successfully created the localized power surge using a small, improvised device, overloading the targeted section of the grid. They heard the alarms and the heavy footsteps below. "This is it," Nash said. "Power will be restored soon, but we have a few minutes." They moved quickly through the shaft, getting closer to the penthouse suite. Through a vent grill, they could glimpse part of the luxurious room. Thorn wasn't there, but two guards were checking the windows and an open laptop sat on a large desk. Perhaps the meeting had been delayed by the power failure. "That laptop," Ethan pointed. "If we could get the data off it." It was an enormous risk. Nash looked at Ethan, then nodded. They worked in sync. Nash used a small tool to carefully pry loose the vent grill near the floor while Ethan kept watch. Nash slipped out, moving like a shadow towards the desk, and plugged a small USB device, a high-speed data copier, into the laptop. A light on the drive flickered, indicating the copy process was underway. It would only take seconds. But just then one of the guards turned back. He spotted the figure hunched over the desk. "Who's there?" he yelled, drawing his weapon. Nash yanked the USB drive out just as the copy completed, diving back towards the vent opening. Ethan was ready, pulling him in. A bullet from the guard's gun slammed into the wall right beside the opening as Nash pulled his legs clear just in time. "Intruder alert. Intruder in the penthouse." The shouts and the gunshot echoed. "Go!" Nash yelled, stuffing the USB drive into his pocket. They scrambled back through the ventilation duct as fast as they could, the sound of running feet and shouting growing behind them. They knew the only way out now was back the way they came, down to the old tunnel, hoping the chaos above ground would distract the security forces searching for them. Chapter 5. Escape Under the Swiss Sky. Abby had reached the delivery area behind the resort. Luckily, the Gourmet Global truck had just arrived to collect the catering equipment. She quickly blended in with the staff loading items onto the truck, her heart still pounding with the fear of being caught at the last second. As the truck rolled out of the security gate, she finally allowed herself a real breath of relief. She was out. But what about Ethan and Nash? In the dark, damp tunnel, Ethan and Nash were racing against time. The barking of security dogs echoed from the tunnel entrance they'd used. They were being pursued closely. "They're catching up." Ethan gasped, out of breath. Nash didn't reply, just pushed harder. He knew there was only one way. As they neared the manhole they'd entered through, he stopped, pulling out a small homemade explosive device. "When I give the signal, run straight for the rental car. Don't look back," Nash ordered. He placed the charge in a fissure in the tunnel wall, setting an extremely short timer. "Go." They shoved the manhole cover open and burst out into the cold night air. The dog's barking was very close now. Just as they ran a few yards, a dull boom reverberated from underground. Not loud enough to draw attention from afar, but sufficient to collapse a section of the tunnel, blocking their pursuers and the dogs. They threw themselves into the waiting rental car and sped off, tires skidding on the lightly snow-dusted road. In the rearview mirror, Ethan could see flashlight beams sweeping frantically around the manhole area. They had made it by a hair's breadth. They drove through the night, not daring to stop, changing direction frequently to shake off any potential tails. Nash plugged the recovered USB drive into an encrypted laptop. Data began to fill the screen, not just financial transactions, but lists of compromised government officials in multiple countries, detailed plans for sophisticated money laundering operations, and chillingly, a list of targets for elimination, which included their own names and Mac was compromised, Nash said, his voice heavy. He must have tried to warn us before he was caught, or worse. His fears were confirmed. They had lost a crucial ally. As dawn approached, they reached another remote village, where Abby waited for them at the secondary rendezvous point. The reunion was quiet, marked by tight hugs and shared looks of worry. "We have enough evidence," Nash said, gesturing to the laptop screen. "More than we hoped for. But Thorn knows we have it now. He won't let us rest. So what do we do?" Abby asked. We release it, Ethan said decisively. But not through official channels Thorne might control. We need an independent journalist, someone fearless, who can verify this and blow it wide open. Nash nodded slowly. I know just the person. Chapter 7. Fragile Peace and the Continuing War. A few days later, from another safe location outside Swiss borders, the world was rocked by a series of detailed investigative reports published simultaneously by several reputable independent news outlets. The documents leaked by the anonymous source exposed Silas Thorne's entire criminal empire, from money laundering and bribery of high-ranking officials to assassination plots. International arrest warrants were issued for Thorne and numerous associates. Although Thorne himself had vanished without a trace immediately after the incident at Les Sommets d'Étoile, his empire had begun to crumble. Ethan, Abby, and Nash watched the news unfold on an old television in a temporary safe house. A sense of relief, albeit incomplete, finally washed over them. They had done it. They had exposed the truth. But the fight wasn't over. Thorne was still out there. He was dangerous, resourceful, and undoubtedly plotting revenge. And Mac's fate remained a painful unknown. A soft knock sounded at the door. Nash instinctively drew his weapon, then lowered it as he recognized the visitor. It was the old farmer who had been looking after Ranger. And with him, tail wagging furiously, was the loyal German shepherd. Ranger bounded into the room, joyfully jumping up on Ethan and Abby, licking their faces. Wrapped in their four-legged friend's embrace, for the first time in days, they felt a moment of genuine peace. Ethan knelt, hugging Ranger tightly. We did it, boy. We did it. Abby sat beside him, stroking Ranger's thick fur. Nash stood near the door, watching quietly, a rare smile touching his scarred face. They had won a major battle, secured justice for Ethan, and brought a dark truth partially into the light. But the war against forces like Silas Thorne was a long one. They still lurked in the shadows, waiting for their chance. Ethan stood up, looking at Nash and Abby, his gaze determined. Beside him, Ranger stood steady, ready. They had come too far to stop now. Though danger remained, though the future was uncertain, they would face it together. The hunt in the shadows might be paused, but the fight for justice and truth would continue. And this time they knew they weren't alone.